As an architect, I really value honesty and authenticity in the architecture that I create. Through these values are expressed in the kinds of construction techniques that I'm interested in. And in this project, it was an exploration of the tectonic potential of concrete. And in other projects, I've also explored the potentials for wood construction and steel construction at the same time, and also hybrid architectural constructions that allow us to really use something that's vernacular and also something that's rooted in the site and it's our context. So I'm really interested in exploring what the modern vernacular is and how these modern vernacular architectural and tectonic elements contribute to, in a way, what I would say is a new kind of architecture that's for our country and for our context and climate as well. Hi, my name is Sudar Khadka, and this is BluPrint Notes from the Architect. So the client approached me to design a house for herself and her family. In a way, it was thought of as a way to downsize their existing house into a smaller house that's built on a smaller property. But at the same time, it had to be very functional. The site is located on a 175 square meter property, and it's slightly tapering towards the rear from about 10 meters to roughly 3 meters at the back. So the challenge here really had to do was how to fit the house within a triangular space and not make it feel like you're in an awkwardly shaped space. We planned it around the module of a 3 by 3 meter grid. And on the southern exposure, we located the heavy shear wall on the southern side and also created tubular shear walls around the front of the house and also around the rear. This diagram essentially is the party of the house, and this allows us to create the connections between the interior and exterior spaces. So all the private spaces are located in these tubular zones, and all the common spaces are located in the center of the house. So in effect, the center of the house really anchors the spaces together. And at the same time, on this northern exposure, we would have a heavily wooded area, and then on the southern exposure, we have a setback area, which is an easement, which will never be built on. Effectively, the house is on an island, and then it's also surrounded by a lot of trees. This gives the impression of being in a secluded forest somehow. At the same time, this triangular geometry helped inform the architectural details of the project. So I'm interested in the poetry of tectonics. So I'm interested in how building construction systems have the capacity to express different ideas. So it's about finding a way to puncture space, finding a way to connect different spaces to each other, but at the same time maintain a kind of privacy and a kind of security within these spaces. There were 5 bedrooms that she needed to house her entire family. And at the same time, she wanted to have a lot of space for communal gatherings as well. And one of the main briefs that she had was to make it very strong and sturdy because it was located near a fault line. The fault line is about 30 meters away, so we had to ensure that everything that was done so that the house would be structurally stable and that it would also at the same time make the spaces function really well. So the new technology that we used for this house was primarily had to do with the elevation also. We had to meet a certain height restriction within the village. That's roughly 9 meters tall. That's why we had to plan the house as a series of shear walls also, divided by 2 levels in between. So the flat slabs are at 3 meter heights intervals because that's the maximum limit that would fit within the building height restriction. Doing this, we were required to use a thinner slab system so that we can maximize the ceiling height within the space. And therefore, we were able to limit the thickness of the slab to 300 millimeters as opposed to the typical 600 millimeter plenum for the ceiling and the beam system. So in effect, we were able to save 300 millimeters of the ceiling height so that we can still maintain like a higher floor to ceiling ratio within the whole property. At the same time, we utilized this shear wall and board formed concrete system that allowed us to maximize the potential of using concrete itself as a structural system and also as an architectural element. The interesting thing about using concrete is that it is actually a very liquid material when you begin using it, when you mix it, and then it hardens to become concrete and solid after. So we were trying to express the duality between this potential of the concrete as a material which can capture a texture and at the same time a material which could be solid to withstand also the requirements for earthquake, typhoon loads, and so on. Applying these two technologies of using the flat slab and shear wall system afforded us poetic effects, at the same time technical and also practical benefits. Typically, we don't build with shear wall and flat slab system in the country, so we're trying to innovate and explore this structural system because it affords us a lot of potentials in how do we maximize the vertical dimension of space. At the same time, it's also a utilitarian move so that we don't have to finish the structure afterwards. In essence, we wanted to reveal the authenticity of the material and also the honesty that it was built using the way that it was built, and we didn't have to cover it up with anything. In a way, this utilitarian and poetic functions were merged by trying to do both at the same time with the same structural system. We use palochina board forms as a way to give texture to the shear walls. The formwork of the concrete walls with palochina, and then we poured the concrete in them, and once we removed the forms, the texture of the wood was revealed. At the same time, we use a similar idea of using banig. So we use mats from Tagaytay, and we bought them and used them as a form liner for the underside of the slab. We also did a lot of material studies about possibly using bamboo or possibly using coco lumber for forms. These are the tests that we had to do before we settled on using palochina because it offered us the blend of something that was still textured but not too rough, and it also gave a certain kind of warmth to the structure. We did some sectional studies of massing studies about different options for how the house would turn out. So these are just some of the configurations that we had as a potential. And finally, these were the studies that were a result of this process of using a modular framework that allowed us to test different configurations for the different spaces of the house. At the end of the day, we selected this massing study, which had to do with having 3 bedrooms stacked upon one another, and then 2 bedrooms also stacked towards the rear of the property, and the common spaces are found in the spaces in between them. And at the same time, we had this red volume became the vertical circulation space for the whole house. And some of the lessons I learned here were really like some things that my father said, put it into practice. That he always says that if the intentions are clear, the solutions will appear. This idea of trying to maximize the potential of the site was an intent that we really had at the start. In effect, the solution became clear about what we really want or had to do to be able to maximize the potential of this property. Another lesson that I learned also was that the house or architecture can really be seen as a framework for life. In a sense, we're able to make the architecture the background for a family's life. So it's not that the architecture should be the star of the show. And in essence, that you simplify your architecture to the bare minimum, and this strength will carry it through, and also give a sense of abstraction so that people can afford to add their own meanings into the architecture. We don't want to say too much with the architecture, but just say something that's enough and say something that might contribute to a family's own interpretations about what their house would be. Thank you, BluPrint, for having me today. I am Sudar Khadka, and this is BluPrint Notes from the Architect.